Boone County, Kentucky, 1976. A passerby discovers the body of a girl on a roadside.
His comment was that there was a young female that was dead on the side of the road. As a police officer, there are many times where you get called to a scene where there are dead bodies. Thankfully, fewer of them involve children.
But this is one such case. A teenager has been raped and murdered.
Our female victim was partially clothed with a bra and a shirt. And additionally, there was some jewelry located on her that was taken from the scene as well.
The murder leaves behind a victim's family struggling for answers.
Who in their right mind is with someone and decides tonight, I'm going to take this person's life? That's just beyond my comprehension.
I would have to say inhuman. I cannot resolve in my mind how someone could do something so brutal.
The investigation that follows lasts for over 40 years, until the emergence of a revolutionary forensic technique.
This would not have been solved without that science.
It completely changed the investigation here, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that it could lead in the future.
When cold cases have exhausted all investigative avenues, investigators turn to new, groundbreaking technology: forensic investigative genetic genealogy. Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Boone County, Kentucky, a rural community in the American Midwest.
Great place to live. It's a great place to live and raise a family, good schools.
Very safe. A desired neighborhood. Lots of houses, mostly brick, larger yards. Very nice.
A lot of families who have lived here several generations make up the fabric of our communities. So you kind of had that down home kind of feel to it. We're not Southern Kentucky, but we are still Kentucky. So that part is you have that family-oriented, church-based type communities.
We moved here in 1965. It was very, very different then than what it's like now. It's overpopulated, it's grown, there's hardly any, woodlands left, there's apartments and stores everywhere. I liked it the old way, but, you have to go with what's going on.
We're not immune to crimes and other things just because we have a large population and just because those things happen. But I would say overall we're a very safe community.
We don't have a lot of murders here, but when we do have murders, they tend to be the scratch your head, whodunit kind of murders.
Back in 1976, Boone was much more rural. It was much smaller and a much tinier community than it is today.
Boone County has changed vastly since 1976. Not only the face of the county itself, but the face of law enforcement. In 1976, it would have been a good day if there were 2 or 3 officers for the whole county. And now we have maybe 30 for the whole county. So just the manpower alone. The population was much lower in 1976, but we didn't have near the crime that we have now that comes with that increased population.
On the morning of June the 5th, 1976, a man driving to work makes a horrific discovery.
Dr. Gaines Huey, who was a dentist in the Walton City area. He was on his way to work. He lived on Chambers Road, which is where the body was found, and he was on his way to work across Chambers Road, and it was about 5 minutes till 8. And as he was making his way across Chambers Road, he saw what he believed to be a body laying there. And then as he got out of the vehicle and looked at it, he realized that this was a young female and was partially clothed. She obviously was deceased, and that was the phone call that he made to the Kentucky State Police Post.
The first law officer on the scene is Trooper Jan Hoschner. Soon, more police follow.
He arrived, and obviously when he saw what he saw and confirmed that it was a body and that it was deceased, he had called post and requested them to contact the detectives. She was only wearing her bra and a white blouse, and then she was unclothed the rest of her body.
Investigators comb the area for material evidence, hopeful the killer has left behind some clues.
The evidence at the scene was extremely limited. DNA wasn't even really a thing for law enforcement in 1976, and they would have just collected those other items just to see if they related back to the killer somehow.
They will take photographs before anyone else gets there. They secure the scene, and then they request the coroner to come out. The body was removed from the scene on Chambers Road to the office in Florence, Kentucky at Stith Funeral Home.
At this stage, police have a body and small pieces of evidence from the scene, but they have yet to discover the name of the victim.
Detective Keith started working his case throughout the day, and as the night wore on, then Mrs. Renaker had called to report her daughter was missing, that she hadn't come home. She'd been gone all night. And Detective Jerry Keith went to the residence that he had found the 2 necklaces and the earring. And when he described that, Betty said, yes, that's Carol's. He felt sure then that, hey, this was her daughter. To make positive identification, there has to be a viewing.
They needed someone to come and identify the body. So Thomas, her older brother, who was 18, he stepped up and identified that it was Carol Sue.
An autopsy reveals how Carol Klaber met her death.
The result of it was the death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head. She was hit many, many times in the head, and that was the cause of death. But there was also attempted strangulation with the necklaces that she was wearing.
And it was assumed a tire iron that he used to bash her head, 7 injuries. And head wounds bleed. You know, you can have a small scratch and you know that it will bleed. I cannot imagine the crime scene. It had to be horrendous.
The other things that were really troubling, especially for a young lady this age, was that they found evidence of sexual assault and that there was a significant sign of struggle where she resisted and fought the act as it was happening, according to the autopsy report. So that is extremely bothersome. It's one of those things that it's just hard for the normal person to wrap their mind around, that someone could be that brutal and take something from someone just because they decided that's what they wanted.
Carol's cousin and friend hears the awful news.
We would take a yearly vacation to Dale Hollow Lake. My parents had a boat. And I was sitting in the little living room flipping through the paper, opened it up, and it was on the front page of the paper.
When Mom told me what had happened to her, I just kind of lost it. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, this can't be true. I just saw her.
I doubted myself, to be quite honest with you. It was such a shock. I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, you know, isn't Carol Sue Klaber, right? Our cousin. Yes. Oh, Mom, you know, she was murdered. So my mother of course, became very upset. And at that time, we didn't have cell phones, and the only phone was a payphone at the dock. So she took off out of the cabin and went to the dock and called home, and I'm certain she called my great-grandmother her grandmother.
A community in shock, a teenager brutally raped and murdered, and a police team with few leads to follow. Will the killer of Carol Klaber be found? Boone County, Kentucky, June 1976. The body of 16-year-old Carol Klaber is found dumped by the roadside. Investigators have little to go on as they piece together any clues found in this remote location.
We have had several bodies over the years that are dumped immediately close to Interstate 75. However, where her body was found, it would have taken quite a while for the person to drive to that location.
It isn't just the location that is unusual. Serious crime is very rare in this part of Boone County in the 1970s.
It takes what is otherwise a very safe community and it makes them afraid, especially for it to happen at a place like DeVue Park, a place you feel safe, that families go to routinely, that people can walk.
You had to kind of like be very careful, you know, what you said. You had to watch the people that you were hanging out with. There was fear. There was a lot of fear in a lot of the girls at school.
Myself and our friends, we made a basic, constant social rule. If we arrive together and we go somewhere together, we all leave together. It just made you more aware of what could happen, that loss of innocence, so to speak.
I never got in a car with anyone that I did not know. I never went any place with anybody that I did not know, that there weren't more than one or two people there.
So who is Carol Klaber, and is it possible that she may have known her killer?
Carol was a 16-year-old young high school girl. She went to Dixie High School in Kentucky. Her family was well-to-do. Her father was an engineer in the oil industry, and he brought up a daughter that he was going to cherish his whole life. She played the piano, she played lawn darts, and she would play croquet.
She was vivacious but not gregarious, fun, intelligent, very smart, very athletic, very comfortable to be around. More taking almost a leadership role in social situations. Dependable. You know, you knew she was a friend. She was that type of person. You just knew she was the personality that would be a friend.
She was very outgoing, that she would talk to people that other kids her age, you know, wouldn't talk to. I think she was just a free spirit kind of person, and from the way that she's been described.
Carol was a Girl Scout, and she was a Brownie. Now, in Kentucky, this was middle America, where there were values about growing up and being a part of the community. And that was Carol, because her father felt that. Her father died in 1970. It was a terrible impact upon her. And she wanted to fulfill what her dad wanted, and that was to be someone who cared, because when you are part of the Girl Scouts of America, you have a value of caring for people, and in return, those people care about you.
At the time, gasoline was less expensive. My friends had cars, and we would ride around. We would go through Burger Chef, McDonald's, drive up through the park, of course, and just socialize with people. We would go to DeVue Park and put our cars in a circle. Everyone would turn the radio on to the same station, and we would dance and socialize and just enjoy meeting other people.
Easy to make friends with, real easy to talk to. But she also was kind of quiet, and it kind of took her a while to, you know, to get to know people. But once she got to know you, she was like, and if she was a friend to you, that's what she was.
She was a success story in the works. Her talent, her intelligence, her willingness to reach out to other people was very rare. She was a gift. She was a beautiful person.
Details begin to emerge about the young girl's movements on the day of her murder.
At that time, some details were shared with my mother that she had been riding her bike and came home and said that she was going out to dinner with a man.
They placed her bicycle in the trunk of the car. She got into the car with him and drove back to her house, which is a very strong indication that that was someone that she knew. When they got back to the house, she took the bike out of the car, put it in the garage, went upstairs. Her mom heard her. She said she was headed out to go to Zeno's, which was a restaurant, with some friends. And so as she goes out the door, Mom didn't actually see her eye to eye, and she looks out the window, and she had changed her purple blouse to a white blouse and got into the vehicle with a gentleman. The vehicle was described by a lady across the street and being a newer model, Pontiac Grand Prix or Chevy Monte Carlo. And she gave a description, an amazing description of the individual as being 5'10", slender build, approximately 150 pounds, real light blonde hair. Detective Keith had looked at some other cases in the area that were unsolved, and there was a sketch in one of those cases he would have considered at that time a companion case that he thought was related to this one. So there was a sketch that eventually in the Klaber case was kind of put out, if anyone recognizes this, because he believed at the time that the same person who did a rape case in Park Hills, Kentucky, was the same person who would have done Carol Klaber's rape and murder.
With a decent description of the suspect and the possible link with another rape case, investigators feel that they are beginning to make real progress.
Detective Keith was pretty amazing. And when you look at that, he talked to friends that she went to school with that didn't have any real connection to the case, but just to ask the questions to see if there was anything that they may know as to where maybe she liked to hang out. He talked to relatives. He talked to the principal at the school. He talked to everyone. He wasn't leaving any stone unturned. There were several girls that had been raped and murdered in the greater Cincinnati area during that time period. So much so that Detective Keith met with other police agencies to, kind of have a little think tank and see the commonality and all of those kinds of things. And out of those type of meetings was where he decided that the Park Hills case was really close. There were a lot of similarities in the two cases, cigarette burns on the body, attempted strangulation. And honestly, when we went back and reviewed the case, we really saw his point. So much so that we ended up going all the way down that road to vet the suspect that he had originally identified in that case.
Is the net closing on Carol Klaber's killer, or are investigators chasing clues that lead to blind alleys? In 2017, a new generation of Boone County detectives reignite the investigation.
Over the years, we always thought about her. Myself, and I know some of her friends, she'd be on people's minds. I would drive past the sheriff's office and think about her every time. Did they ever solve that? Why did we never hear anything more about that? Who was that person that took her life? So she never leaves your mind.
Now a new generation of cold case investigators are revisiting Carol Klaber's murder, hoping that advances in forensic DNA technology will lead them to the man who so cruelly took this teenage girl's life back in 1976.
We went to Park Hills Police Department. There were no police officers still at Park Hills PD from 1976. So everyone there was a different group from chief on down. It's a smaller department. They had nothing to do with the original investigation. So when we went there, we asked if we could look at the case and make a copy of it. And the chief, who I admire him for this, he said, hey, we will sign the case over to you if you want, because it is simply sitting there because we have to keep it, and no one will ever look at it again.
There were two very strong suspects in this case. One of which was somebody who was incarcerated and is presently incarcerated on charges unrelated to this murder. And then there was another suspect that was just outright exonerated through evidence related to this case through a DNA analysis. So we had two strong suspects. And in any case, to have a suspect, let alone the possibility of two, and when those two don't pan out, that can be deflating. And you really have to start back at square one. As an agency, as a group of investigators, we have to then refocus on, okay, what do we have left?
We work pretty closely with our cold case unit. Whenever they have something come up, they usually bring it to us and ask us kind of what the potential is and what's the best way to go about testing. So in this particular circumstance, the cold case unit had come across a hair that they thought could be of potential value that was never fully exploited with modern technology. So they brought that to the criminal forensic unit, and we took a look at it and proposed a plan for going forward with the testing. I don't really have the capacity to forensically analyze that hair to say what color it was, what type of hair it is, whether it's a pubic hair, a head hair, an arm hair. I don't have the capacity to do that. What I do have the capacity to do is ascertain the fact that it is a hair, it does appear to be of value, and I'm gonna forward that to a DNA analyst that's an expert in that to see if there is enough remaining of that root ball from the hair to make sure that they can do some type of testing with that. Initially, we gave it to the Kentucky State Police. The Kentucky State Police, for us, is the laboratory that handles all of our DNA testing, at least for the first round. They had inconclusive results.
The failure to extract a DNA profile is a disappointment, but nonetheless, the investigation continues.
Whenever we have something, and particularly in a cold case, where we have an item of evidence that was brought to light by really good cold case investigators, we really have high hopes when we see things like that, that this could be the key, this could be the thing. And initial reports from the state police were like, hey, I think we can maybe get something out of this. So it was positive in the beginning. So when we got the inconclusive results, it was a setback.
Then the team's hopes are raised as word spreads about other cases across the United States being solved by a powerful new technique, forensic investigative genetic genealogy. Othram Laboratories in Texas are world leaders in this field.
I started getting a lot of phone calls from a representative from Othram, and most of that went along the lines of, hey, we are a lab, we do genealogy, we want to help solve crimes. If you have cases with unknown DNA profiles in the National CODIS database, then we want to help you.
For such groundbreaking work to take place, Boone County detectives first need to secure funding.
They had shared with us the information about Season of Justice. The way they explained it was, look, if you talk to them and apply for a grant and your case meets this criteria, there's a really good chance they're going to provide the funding for you. And again, it's like, yeah, this is too good to be true, but okay, let's do it.
They still had a strong DNA sample that we were able to use and submit to Othram, and then Othram was really the driving force behind us being able to ultimately solve this case.
We, and in particular the cold case unit, came across Authorum in particular. We had used another private lab in the past, and they thought that Authorum could potentially offer us some technology that the state police could not.
We take forensic evidence, submit it to a state lab, the state lab processes, and then the state lab provides the results. In this case, that wasn't an option. And so what we ended up doing was consulting with our state lab and getting them to work part and parcel through our detectives with Authorum to get that evidence to Authorum in order for them to then work up that genealogy profile on the DNA that was collected.
We received from the agency evidence of the assault. From that evidence, the agency had identified an unknown male contributor. So there was male DNA that was found, and they thought that this male DNA came from the person that had essentially assaulted and murdered her.
The state lab created the DNA profile for STR testing first, and then that DNA was sent to us in a tube.
Short tandem repeat, also known as STR analysis, is a method for determining a person's DNA profile by counting the number of times a small DNA sequence is repeated at a specific chromosomal location.
At that point, we took that DNA and we did our feasibility analysis. That's where you go and you figure out all the parameters of the DNA. Hair has very different DNA parameters than other types of inputs, for sure, and would be something that would be difficult to run through a standard medical test or consumer test assay. And I think that's why this case had failed previously in other laboratories. We were able to assess the characteristics of that DNA extract and figure out what the best way to go about creating the best and most robust DNA profile would be that we could use to identify who that perpetrator was.
Forensic genetic genealogy kind of has, in my mind, two prongs. There is one prong that is scientific, where we look at DNA and genetics and relations between people over time, and we use that angle. Also included in that would be Y chromosomal testing, where we just look at the male side of the family. And then there's a whole nother prong that goes through very traditional genealogy research, like family tree sort of stuff that most folks are familiar with, that you couple with that scientific information in this day and age, and hopefully it gets us to an investigative lead.
That DNA is uploaded to genealogical databases consented for law enforcement use, and when they're uploaded, you end up getting really, really distant matches. So instead of just being able to confirm someone's identity, you can now figure out that someone is related to this person as a sixth cousin match, and this person is a fifth cousin match, and this person is a third cousin match. And you can figure out how far away each match is from the person that left the DNA at the crime scene. And then you can infer where the person that left the DNA at the crime scene belongs on a family tree.
And in doing that, we were then able to derive enough matches, enough people that shared at least some similarity in the markers to which we could then piece together a family tree. And in building that family tree, we were able to hone in on leads that directed law enforcement to where we thought the person might sit on that tree.
I'm always cautiously skeptical of new technologies, in particular with the results that our state police had given us in regards to the value of the evidence. So I was a little skeptical. However, when Authorum said that they had a good profile and they thought that it was something that they could do something with early on, then I was extremely hopeful.
Will this new technology finally reveal the killer of Carol Klaber? Boone County, Kentucky, 2022. Detectives are on the verge of finally finding out who killed Carol Klaber in 1976. Investigators provide Othram Labs with a hair sample that was found at the crime scene 46 years ago. The hair sample delivers a double hit. Firstly, it rules out the existing persons of interest, but crucially, it also points to a new name, a new prime suspect.
Because they had an STR profile, they were able to do one-to-one comparisons to exclude suspects. And I think there was 2 people early on that were identified and ruled out because their STR profiles did not match at all the STR profile of the crime scene. And so, even though there was an early hope for success when they had identified these suspects, both were excluded. And so after the process we went through at Othram to build up the big profile and develop the leads, when we came across, eventually the person that they honed in on, his name was Thomas Dunaway. It was very exciting to be able to share that with them because they had a new suspect in the case.
The new suspect comes into the frame over 40 years after the murder. Detectives are hopeful of interviewing Thomas Dunaway of Park Hills, Kentucky, who, like the murder victim, was a teenager at the time of the attack. As they home in on Dunaway, they discover he had an extensive and violent criminal history, including charges for arson and possession of an illegal firearm. Dunaway died from a heart attack in 1990 at the age of 33, 14 years after the death of Carol Klaber. For detectives, it's a result, but also a setback. Good news, however, comes back from a DNA profile carried out by Othram.
The news that we got back was,
This is a 100% match. Thomas Dunaway is your guy that committed the crime.
Thomas Dunaway is who we, through the DNA profile, identified as Carol Klaber's murderer.
after 47 years, finally tracking down the killer, finally identifying Mr. Dunaway as the killer was an extremely, extremely gratifying experience.
We wanted to have something in writing formally, both for the family and for the community, to say that Detectives Cox and Adams had found and identified the killer. And so we sent them a letter basically stating that while we could not do a posthumous indictment, it was my opinion that they had identified the killer, that there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Thomas Dunaway had murdered Carol Sue Klaber, and that had he been alive, we would seek an indictment and would seek to prosecute him for murder.
Cold case detectives dig deeper into Dunaway's background and discover that 9 days after Klaber's body was found, he enlisted in the US Army. While AWOL from his duties, he murdered 19-year-old Ronald Townsend in Boone County just 6 months after the death of Carol Klaber.
We believe that there's a really good chance that Dunaway knew Carol Klaber from the time they were much younger.
Northern Kentucky right now, it's a small community in the sense that it's not hard to know everyone here, but it was a much smaller community in 1976. So I think it is certainly plausible, and if not likely, that he knew her and sought her out. In fact, I think it would be unlikely to say that he didn't.
Knowing how generous she was and how friendly she was, I imagine that she invited him to go to dinner with everybody. Her friends were all going to Zeno's. And I imagine she said, come on, let's go. You know, you can go with me. And probably said, well, hey, I'll drive. Because when you met somebody and you were friends, you were always inviting them. Come on, let's go as a group, let's go. I think that's what happened.
Social scientists tell us that crimes of violence and sex crimes are not about sex. It's hard to understand that. We think that this is a sexual predator who wants to have a sexual thrill. The social scientists tell us, no, that's not what it is. The crime of violence is an issue of dominance, the issue of taking this predator's personality and imposing it on someone who is weaker and unable to defend themselves. That is usually the motive. These sexual crimes are crimes to dominate and to humiliate a woman. And where that comes from, only the good Lord seems to know.
Boone County detectives go public with news in part to tell the community that finally this case has been solved, but also to seek their help in linking Dunaway to other crimes in Kentucky and beyond, including the murder of Ronald Townsend.
In this case, we did a press conference because of the nature of us solving a cold case that was nearly 50 years old, but also given the implications with this case and the strong belief that he may be responsible for other crimes, possibly outside of the state of Kentucky, is also one of these central focuses of what I had to do in relaying a message to the public that was understandable and that people could then take and absorb so that it may benefit our case as a whole.
The initial cause of death was blunt force trauma, with also evidence of sexual assault and strangulation.
It was a bit shocking, actually. I was working from home and I have multiple computers, and it came into my newsfeed. And of course, name. I'm sitting at home by myself and I just, oh my gosh, they found him. And I saw the picture. That's the picture that they used in the news of her. You know, so I knew there was no mistake. This was not a spam, a made up thing. I immediately picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department and thanked them. I'm very grateful that they followed up and they solved the crime.
Thomas Dunaway was definitely in Boone County around that period of time because he was arrested for murder in December of 1976. So Carol went missing and was found raped and murdered on June 5th, 1976. And 6 months later, now this person that has been identified that, hey, this is someone you definitely should look at, committed a murder in Boone County 6 months later.
I was literally floored because he had murdered someone else, dumped them in near about the same place, and received a life sentence in prison, I believe, and he only served 7.5 years of his prison sentence. And it's like, once a liar, always a liar. Once a thief, always a thief. Once a killer, always a killer. You know, it's not going to stop.
If this were in Kentucky, in my circuit right now, I have a hard time believing someone who committed an intentional murder would be out after 7 years.
There's no way in the world you can make any sense of it. When I read the report from the parole officer, so he got out on good behavior at 7.5 years on a life sentence. But what was documented in the report was enough to, even if they needed more than the fact that he had killed someone, they articulated all kinds of infractions while he was in there, which you would think like, you're not getting out. I have no explanation. It's in my opinion, a complete failure on the justice system. He should have not been out.
How do you tell? How do you tell that that person has the capacity to do this when you meet someone? That was the first thing that came to mind. Were there clues of his personality?
He was where he should have been, especially now that we know that he not only did one murder, but he did 2 murders and a rape, and what we believe to be more across the southern United States, because 3 would make him a serial killer. I just wish justice had sent him there, but that's not mine to judge. I'm not a judge and I'm not God.
As there was a 7-year period between his release from jail for the murder of Ronald Townsend and his death, investigators believe he could have committed more murders.
Due to some information developed by our cold case detectives, there was the potential that he could have been involved in others. And the best way to help the other agencies that may have had him as a suspect is to acquire a solid DNA sample from Mr. Dunaway himself. Since Mr. Dunaway had been dead for 33 years, that meant that we had to exhume the body. And the bone that was requested in this case was ribs and molars. Those held the best potential for the DNA evidence. So myself and Detective Goodman suited up full Tyvek and anticipated getting into the grave, recovering that bone, and being done. That is unfortunately not what happened at all. In this particular circumstance, after 33 years, Mr. Dunaway looked like he had been put in the ground yesterday. So what that meant was that with a fully preserved body, we had to climb into the grave, remove the teeth and rib bones. We have solved our crime, but the exhumation and everything else was for the sole function of seeing if we could solve somebody else's.
The Kentucky State Police are currently working on the samples in the hope of linking Thomas Dunaway to other unsolved murders. While his untimely death meant that he cheated justice, it doesn't take the credit away from the Boone County Sheriff's Office, who persisted in a 4-decades-old investigation.
I'm very thankful to the Boone County Sheriff's Department for not letting this go. It would have been easy just to say that's a cold case and we have other things that are more pressing, which you will hear that in the judicial system. We have other cases that are bigger. We have things that are larger. We have things that affect now, and that they didn't walk away from her. I'm very impressed and very grateful.
One of the reasons that we do this job is to speak for victims. That's why we do this, is to do the right thing. And in this particular circumstance, we got to do that. And Ms. Klaber still had family that was very, very much interested in what had happened to her. And we were able to give them that little peace of mind.
Carol Klaber's killer is identified thanks to forensic investigative genetic genealogy. It's a powerful new investigative tool that Othram is using to solve cold cases across the USA.
Even if Season of Justice had said, you know what, for whatever reason, we're not going to fund it, they would have found a way. Othram was committed, and I've learned that from dealing with them over this period of time. They would have found a way to make sure that it got funded. We wouldn't be sitting here today talking about solving Carol Klaber's case if it wasn't for Othram and Season of Justice.
I think if they realized that they were going to get caught and that it's a matter of time, that less crime would be committed in the future. But I also believe that maybe more people will start coming forward and confessing.
The times, they are a-changing. And as a result of that, there's new techniques. Therefore, you are duty-bound as law enforcement, as Boone County law enforcement recognized, and I give them high marks for doing that.
It completely changed the investigation here, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that it could lead in the future for future investigations and potentially resolving other cold cases we have in this community.
When you have breakthroughs in science, and then that science is used for the greater good in any case, whether it's a cold case or a more active, ongoing murder investigation, sexual assault, whatever it may be, that's really a game changer and something that the community should really embrace.
The investigation into the murder of 16-year-old Carol Klaber is finally solved thanks to many agencies coming together and utilizing the power of DNA science, which delivered answers 40 years later.
After all this time, somebody valued her as a person enough to put their energy into this on her behalf. She's not here. She can't hold them accountable. She can't hold the Boone County or the Kentucky State Police accountable for what happens in solving the murder. They did this on their own. And that's an honor to her, in my opinion.
I don't think you ever can get back your loved one, or justice can take back what happened to you or to someone you cared about. But I think that the truth can allow you to move forward.